Hi, and welcome to the 13th installment of the Dad Project, the fourth part regarding my dad's time in Vietnam. Glad to have you back, and tonight we continue to follow my dad, Pete Purvis, as he and the Coral Sea come to the end of their cruise, only to find that events outside the confines of Vietnam would derail their return to San Francisco. Operation Rolling Thunder was winding down and would come to an end soon after they returned to the States. But despite that, he and his fellow airmen would continue to strike North Vietnam with the same ferocity as ever. Let's get started by looking at the home front, events in Korea, and one more adventure had by my dad on his big adventure. But first, let's hear Orson Welles recite John Gillespie's High Flight.
Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter's silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent, lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touch the face of God.
The war in Vietnam was not an all-consuming effort like World War I or II, so our home front experience looked nothing like those wars. There were no man-in-service flags hanging in our window or our neighbors' windows, and heaven forbid a Gold Star mother. No scrap metal drives and no war bond parades. And since we didn't live on base, other than the squadron telephone tree, we were isolated and an anomaly. My mom's mother, my Mimi, would stay with us for a time while my dad was away and would have stayed with us for this entire tour, but her son, Joseph Santigrantucci, my Uncle Joe, known as Duke, was also flying in Vietnam. He was an Air Force pilot on loan to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, known as the ARVN, as a forward air controller for the ARVN Airborne Forces. Their radio call sign was Red Marker, and they, along with the U.S. Army advisors, also attached to the ARVN Airborne, adopted the camouflage uniform and insignia of the Vietnamese Airborne, along with its distinctive red beret. He would fly the Cessna 01E Bird Dog, a derivative of the Cessna 170. That was part of the 19th TAS. His job was to fly low and slow to identify targets, direct fire on targets, and act as a controller for airstrikes on those targets. Not surprisingly, over 120 bird dogs were shot down. To further muddy the waters, my dad's brother, Ronald Scott Purvis, would also be in Vietnam. Like my dad, he too graduated from the Naval Academy, having first enrolled at Ohio State at the ROTC program, and he graduated with the class of '53. He received his wings and was attached to VX-6, and would spend time in Antarctica, a stint as a White House aide in the Kennedy administration, and then, how many times can I say it, the needs of the Navy put him in charge of 5 motion picture units based out of Saigon. Unlike my dad and my Uncle Joe, who flew into enemy fire, my Uncle Scott walked into enemy fire with his film crews. These firefights left him well decorated, but with PTSD that haunted him for the rest of his life. The film footage my Uncle Scott's film crews produced was in response to the TV network's insatiable need for war footage for their nightly news programs. The newsreels shown in theaters during World War II and Korea that spread the visual word were replaced with these more immediate nightly news shows. The Huntley and Brinkley report would come into our home every weekday evening and later Saturday to let us know how the war was going. For my adolescent mind, it was a simple matter of comparing integers. The casualty count for the day, for the week, and the month would pop up on the screen to let me know that the North was losing troops by the thousands, while our allies in the South were faring better and we were doing best of all. My unsophisticated brain couldn't attach real souls to these numbers. It was simply a tote board, and we were winning. And as Joseph Stalin said, of all people, 1 death is a tragedy, 1 million is a statistic. These news programs were dominated by the war in Vietnam, but in January of 1968, an additional event would run in parallel with that war and briefly fight for airtime: the Pueblo incident. On January 23, 1968, the USS Pueblo was taken in international waters by the North Koreans. On paper, the Pueblo was part of the Banner class of converted Kamano-class cargo ships used for environmental research. In fact, they were used for signals intelligence gathering, spying. Despite being taken in international waters, the North Koreans claimed that the Pueblo had made numerous incursions into North Korean territorial waters as it made its way up the Korean coast. The taking of the Pueblo came shortly after North Korea's failed attempt to assassinate South Korean President Park Chung-hee in the president's residence, known as the Blue House, on January 21st. In an urgent dispatch from the Romanian embassy in Pyongyang to Bucharest, it was noted that Esmat Naguib, Chargé d'Affaires of the United Arab Republic to Pyongyang, said that the North Koreans' capture of the USS Pueblo and the failed assassination attempt were meant to effectively and directly help the North Vietnamese people with the consent of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. We believe the statements of the Arab diplomat are unsubstantiated and likely pure speculation, wrote the Romanians. Speculation or not, a more profound battle was only a week away. On January 30th, the combined forces of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese People's Army launched a series of surprise attacks against the South. The Hanoi Politburo believed that these attacks would trigger defections and rebellions of the ARVN forces throughout the South. The initial surprise effectively caught the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces off guard, but the Allies quickly regrouped and were able to soundly defeat the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces. None of the defections and rebellions the North had hoped for materialized. Despite being a serious and debilitating military setback for the North, it put into motion events that would lead to what can only be described as a long drawdown to the eventual withdrawal of American forces from Vietnam on March 29, 1973, and the North's victory over the South on April 30, 1975. On March 31, 1968, President Johnson announced that he would halt the bombing in North Vietnam, while at the same time announcing that he would not seek re-election. Operation Rolling Thunder was over. This would have been background noise for my father and his shipmates, had it not affected them directly. Following the capture of the Pueblo by the North Koreans, the USS Enterprise, that was steaming to Yankee Station, was diverted to the Sea of Japan. In addition, the USS Ranger, that was on Yankee Station, was ordered to rendezvous with the Enterprise to complete the emergency redeployment of the U.S. 7th Fleet warships to the Sea of Japan off the coast of Korea as a show of force. The Coral Seas tour was extended for another month on Yankee Station to cover for the Ranger while she was away. Not welcome news, but unnecessary evil and an opportunity for the Coral Sea to have a go at the infamous Thanh Hoa Railroad Highway Bridge. As noted on the book jacket blurb of Stephen Kuntz and Barrett Tillman's book, Dragon's Jaw, an epic story of courage and tenacity in Vietnam, every war has its bridge. Movies have been made about them. The movie The Bridge at Remagen is about the bridge at Remagen over the Rhine during World War II. The movie, The Bridges at Tokorai, although fictional, is loosely based on Grumman Panther attacks on the Sueho Dam and the Mae Jong Ni Bridge during the Korean War. For Vietnam, it would be the Thanh Hoa Bridge that the Vietnamese had nicknamed Dragon Jaw because of its layout. From 1965 through 1972, when it finally fell, the USAF and Navy sent 873 sorties to drop the bridge. Thousands of tons of ordnance were dropped on the bridge to no effect before it finally fell. 14 aircraft were shot down, 13 pilots and crew killed, 7 taken prisoner, and 4 rescued over that 8-year period. It ended when the bridge was finally dropped on April 27, 1972 by USAF Phantoms out of Ubon, Thailand. 2 follow-on strikes were ordered to be sure of its destruction, the first by USAF Phantoms and finally by Navy A-7s. The bridge remained down until the end of the war. With an additional month of time online in the Tonkin Gulf as the Pueblo incident played out on the Sea of Japan, Carrier Air Wing 15 flying off the Coral Sea was tasked with alpha strikes against the Thanh Hoa Bridge as well as the transshipment and staging area at Vinh. Like every log entry my dad wrote for his flight time in Vietnam, this one was no different. As follows: the date of the flight, January 28th. The aircraft model, the F-4B. Its serial number, 151511. The flight code, in this case 1V9. 1 for daylight visual, V for reconnaissance, and 9 for escort or cover from above. Total flight time, 1.9 hours. A notation for 2 wet plugs for 2 in-flight refuelings, 1 arrested landing, 1 catch shot, and the name of his Rio, Cooper. There is no target information. There are no weather observations, although he would note for the book Dragon's Jaw that it was Chamber of Commerce weather. What did my dad have for breakfast? It wasn't eggs. He hated eggs. How did he feel about this bonus strike, this alpha strike, thanks to the North Koreans? He had written to his parents on November 30th, 1967 to say that they had had an unexpected stand down because of the weather. He went on further to say that everybody was happy, although there are still some people left who have some masochistic desire to be shot at. Enough to say he wasn't one of them. So what happened on this hop? The details of this mission were related to Stephen Kuntz and Barrett Tillman for their book Dragon's Jaw, mentioned earlier. This would not be a flak suppression flight for my dad, so he was not the first in with the Vietnamese anti-aircraft crews hunkered down for their own safety. No, he was flying cover for the RF-8 that would come in low and fast to photograph the outcome of the strike, with the anti-aircraft crews aware that they were coming, as they always did, after the bombing of a target. He and the RF-8 orbited just offshore at 15,000 feet, waiting for the strike group to finish and for the resulting smoke to clear. When that happened, both the RF-8 and my dad's F-4 pushed over to come over the photographic target at 4 to 6,000 feet at 600 knots, almost 700 miles an hour, almost supersonic. As expected, as they neared the bridge, the gray, black, and white clouds from anti-aircraft fire pocked the sky as orange tracers darted everywhere. Neither aircraft was hit, and they bobbed and weaved their way to the coast 10 miles away. My dad's relief was broken by the sound of the RF-8 pilot's voice on his headset. Switchbox 110, cork tip 710. The radio frequencies were not meant for social calls, so my dad waited for the bad news. The RF-8 was in good shape, that was the good news, but the pilot had forgotten to flip his camera on. They had to go back and do it again. Getting through the first time was bad enough, and the second time could only be worse, my dad reasoned. But if they didn't do it, someone else would have to. They quickly decided to do the same route in reverse and hope for the best. 600 knots straight and level for the RF-8 to do its thing, once again, but this time, not a single AAA puff of smoke or orange tracer for color. All the actors in this deadly production had done their bit, so my dad and the recon pilot coming back through for the second time was totally unexpected. And the bridge? It still stood as it would for several more years. And that was it. Air Wing 15's time over North Vietnam had come to an end for this deployment. They would fly over the south in support of American and South Vietnamese forces pushing back the remnants of the Tet Offensive. But the anti-aircraft available to the Viet Cong was nothing like that in the north. Operation Formation Star was the name of the surge deployment that had redirected U.S. 7th Fleet ships to the Sea of Japan following the Pueblo incident. It placed considerable strain on the 7th Fleet's carriers' ability to effectively carry out their duties at Yankee Station. And with the Tet Offensive following close on the heels of the Pueblo being taken, it strained that ability even further. When the Coral Sea finally left Yankee Station on the 20th of February, they sailed for the Sea of Japan to relieve the Ranger. There, they conducted cold weather training as part of Operation Formation Star and its continued presence off the coast of Korea. The Coral Sea would finally be relieved by the Bonhomme Richard and set sail for San Francisco. For the operation she had completed at Yankee Station, the Coral Sea received her 3rd Navy Unit Commendation. The toll for her 3rd combat tour was 4 KIA, 1 MIA, and 4 POWs, one of whom died in captivity. CVW-15 suffered 15 combat losses. While my dad was away and we waited for his return, we experienced 2 earthquakes, one shaker, one roller. If not for the Navy pumper sent to our house from Miramar and my brother and I hosing down the roof of our house, it would have burned down in a major wildfire. I had nearly been bitten by a rattlesnake. I was the Marble King at Midland Elementary School until it was banned because it was considered gambling. For years I kept my cat's eyes, clearies, boulders, and aggies in a highly prized Crown Royal bag. There had been a freak snowstorm. I had my future pegged to a career in the majors until a bad hop bloodied my nose and I could never again properly feel the grounder. 14-year-old Nikki Benedette was stabbed to death walking home from a friend's house, and her murder has never been solved. The only time I had been shot at was when our gang of neighborhood boys decided chasing one another through the desert scrub, armed with BB guns, would be fun. That is, until Donald Williams took a BB to the leg and our mothers disarmed us. Candy Cherry was my first crush. Seriously, that was her name. In other words, while my father was in mortal danger, my small life went on, as did our family and everyone else's in the small town of Poway. And then on April 22, 1968, 55 years ago, My dad and his squadron flew into Miramar, where we and the other squadron families greeted him. I was thrilled to have him back, but as any military family can attest, the shift of power from Mom and back to Dad is not an easy transition, but he was home. He helped coach my Little League team. My brother was the bat boy. He went to the Admiral's Ball at Miramar with my mom, and he began to prepare for his next chapter. So, until next time when we find out what that next chapter will look like, thanks for joining me for the 13th installment of the Dad Project. I continue to tell the stories I had hoped my father would tell me, and I appreciate y'all being along for the ride. So please subscribe if you'd like to hear more, and until next time, thanks for watching and enjoy what life has given you. Ciao.